So today I wanted to talk about stories and meaning, and really the meanings that we make for our life and the things that happen to us, and especially about ourselves and the people around us. So basically, there's what happens in life, and then there is our story or interpretation of what happens. So one of my early Zen teachers said something interesting. He said that there's this object and our experience of it. So our experience, our direct experience is one thing, and then the next level, he said, is essentially naming. So if I name it, I can call this a pen, basically. At the level of experience, it's some bits of metal, it's some bits of plastic. There's some ink inside. There's some rubber. So that's more at the level of experience. And then there's naming, and naming its pen. And then on the third level, it's a good pen, it's a bad pen, or any number of stories that I could tell myself about this pen. This pen could mean that everything in my life will work out, or this pen could mean that nothing in my life will work out, or a reason to fall in love, or a reason to get into a fight with somebody. So all those things are possible based on the meaning that we're attributing to things. And I think, intuitively, people know this. And the tricky thing is that this mechanism happens immediately and automatically without our noticing it. So it's as if something happens in the world, or we have an experience in the world, and the meaning just shows up in our experience without us really very often being aware of, like, wow, I just attributed some meaning to something without realizing it. And for me, the most obvious examples of this is when I make a mistake, when I make some meaning out of something, or especially if I make meaning out of something that somebody did, and then I find out later that the reason was completely different. And those are kind of shocking moments when they happen, because we realize, like, oh my God, I made this meaning without even realizing it, and yet something else was really at play there. And so that's actually a wonderful moment when you can start to distinguish that, oh, I was wrong, although it's really hard to admit we're wrong at times, at least for myself. But the tricky thing is to notice the meaning that we're making when we believe the meaning, when we believe that somebody did something for a particular reason. And it's, especially if we're upset, it's very hard to step back and realize, okay, this is a story that I'm telling myself, or it's an interpretation. And even if the interpretation seems correct, it's still an interpretation. And you could look at, okay, maybe my interpretation seems right. Maybe this person did something and they had ill will towards me, so I'm right, like my interpretation is right. However, you can begin to ask, am I somehow embellishing it? Am I making the meaning a little bit bigger? Am I painting them into a particular character that's a little bit bigger than the so-called reality of the situation? And so I think it can be useful to step back and we talk about stepping outside and looking at it from the outside, and beginning to ask, if 10 other people saw this, would they draw the exact same conclusion, or what would they see in terms of raw data without a story attached to it? I think it can also be really powerful to make up another story. Even if you make up a story that's that you know is wrong, it can start to loosen you up from the seriousness of whatever story you're telling yourself. I was reflecting on this today, and what occurred to me is just about any grudge that I still have in my experience, I can also notice that there's a story that I've been unwilling to let go of. I can't find an example of a place where I still feel upset, resentment, grudge, whatever, without a fixed story. You know, I mean, if the minute you let go of the story, it's, you know, it's like the grudge or everything goes away. The minute you even invite a possible second interpretation or an additional story, you know, it's almost impossible to have the same response or reaction in your experience. Like I was saying in the beginning, the tricky thing is it's hard to notice that we're telling a story. So just distinguishing something as a story. Another thing I like to do is if let's say I have a disagreement with somebody and I really feel like I'm right, I might ask myself, if someone were to see this from the outside that didn't speak English, for example, didn't speak my language, what would they observe? How would they describe the situation? Now, I could say, well, they don't know, they don't understand, so therefore they don't know that my story is correct. But I think it can help you get a little bit more perspective or objectivity on the situation. If it was just sounds and not specific words, even the fact that some words have more of a charge for us, that's an example that we've attributed more meaning or more story to those words. Those words have become sort of charged anchors in our experience. Now, one place that this is really, really powerful is, what are the stories that you tell yourself about yourself? What do you paint yourself as capable? Do you paint yourself in a light that you like, or that you appreciate, or that you could acknowledge? Or do you tell yourself stories about yourself that are not so favorable, or about not feeling capable or loving or lovable or deserving? So what are the stories that, you know, when you meet somebody new, what stories are you beginning to tell them about you? It's very interesting. When we meet strangers, very often we're educating them about who we are. And even more so, we're educating them about how we see ourselves. If it's very interesting, if you don't share a lot, then people don't get the same cues about how to interact with you. And you may find that people respond to you very differently if you haven't sort of educated them in about, I'm this type of person or that type of person. I was listening to an interview with a fantastic jazz piano player that I really like, but he said something that was very interesting. And you know, he said, "Oh, when I was a kid, I was a prodigy," and he said, "So I had this thing of being a prodigy, and I'm a prodigy." And it was interesting hearing him say this, because I could tell that this label of being a prodigy had somehow so shaped his experience that it was still kind of messing with him in some way. He was still trying to live up to this idea of being a prodigy and a certain expectation. And then a couple of years later, I heard another interview with him. And again, he brought up the fact that he had been this prodigy. And what really hit me about this is that this experience is something that he brings with him, and that he hasn't, I'm not saying he needs to let go, but he certainly hasn't let go of it. It's something that he's still wrestling with. He hasn't found a comfortable relationship with the idea that he had been a prodigy, and somehow he's still fitting into that role. And very often we do have these interpretations that we accepted of ourselves when we were growing up. And the question is, are those interpretations things that you want to update possibly? Just because you were one way doesn't mean you are that way now. And it doesn't mean that that's going to determine what's in the future either, unless we keep revivifying the same stories, the same interpretations. I had an exchange with a friend years ago that was very funny. I explained that I felt that I was one particular way, like my beliefs about money were one way because my parents interacted with me about money in one way. And he said something funny. He said, first of all, he pointed out that his parents did a similar thing and he had a completely different response to it. So that was interesting. I was like, wow, here's somebody who had a similar circumstance, but had a very different response. And he had quite a sense of humor, but he said to me, I bet if your parents responded to you the way that you wanted, you'd probably still have something to say about that. And I think he was right. I think no matter what my parents did or relayed to me in terms of money, I probably would have had something to say about it. And there's nothing we can necessarily do about what the people around us did or things like that. But what we can do is decide to shift our response to it now in the present and moving forward. So this is just a little bit the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, of stories and how we can begin to notice them and hopefully develop a healthy skepticism about, is this story, is it really accurate, or where and how am I embellishing it? And what are some other stories that I could tell that might be more empowering and more useful to me? So I hope you enjoy that.